the lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway. Restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Light on as I drive on, singing our song. The light on as I drive on, singing our Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you. Welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. All right, Barnes getting himself to that camera. So before he does, let's just talk about how this is 2016 on steroids all over again. Joe Biden should be the easiest president in the modern era to defeat and make a one-term president, if not for the stupidity of the dumbest party in, again, the modern era. The Republican Party loves to beat itself. That's what they're good at. Often people always ask me the same questions over and over again. Why did they do this? Why did they do that? It's usually one of three things. It's because they're scared, they're corrupt, or they're stupid. That's the one-third ingredient of the modern Republican Party. It's 2016 all over again, only taken to the extreme. Same people, only they're not dealing with a quarter to a third of the electorate that is absolutely dead set on Trump. They're dealing with a majority. The other day, and I put it up on Twitter for everybody to see before I get into this Iowa stuff, because we were talking about Iowa. The other day, a donor told me this, and I quote, and I went ahead and I put it up for everybody to see. All right. And I was thinking considerably about saying who this is, because we get this very same thing a lot, but this person is an important person. So for them to say this, it's telling. Most of the DeSantis donors in the last couple of weeks, and DeSantis is the modern Cruz candidate. It'll be whoever else. I mean, there was Bush, then there was Walker first, then there was Bush, and then it was Cruz, it was Rubio, it was anybody but Donald Trump for Fox News, the donor class, the likes. This is verbatim, the quote. If there was no real primary, it would be impossible for them to do this, referring to the Trump indictments. If he, Ron DeSantis, who this person has donated to, dropped out and endorsed Trump, that would be the end of this. But he won't. He's put his own personal ambition above us all. Nothing they pitched has worked. In other words, nothing the DeSantis campaign said to these people has worked. Don't worry, wait until he gets in. The announcement's going to be just, the best thing since sliced bread. And we're going to change the trajectory of the race. But so we got something totally different planned. And this person was privy to those plans at first. Many people probably don't know this. It was supposed to be this very traditional but hyped up campaign announcement in a suburb of Tampa where the former governor, or the current governor, he's about to be, grew up. And they junked that for this new age. Let's get Laura Ingraham to carry our water while we do this Twitter announcement that's supposed to be, and I'm all for new stuff. It's a new age. It's a new day. It's a new dawn. I'm all for it. But it was amateur hour, and it was plagued by glitches, plagued by problems. You can blame that on Elon Musk all you want, but it was the campaign's job to make sure that their candidate isn't exposed to failure and embarrassment like that. That was, first of all, the first confirmation that they had an entire strategy built upon falsehoods and just incorrect assumptions. Now, number one, you never hype a campaign event to begin with. You don't overhype things because you never, ever, ever want to overpromise and underperform. That's politics 101. And if you can't live up to the hype, rest assured you will get caught in a negative headline trap, and it'll just be over and over on loop until one after another your donors leave you and the polls fall, and that's it. But that's not the course correct. We keep hearing about these course corrections. It's nothing new. Nothing is new, and the country is facing, 70+% of the Republican Party feels that this country is facing an existential threat to liberty, and yet we're doing and seeing the same old nonsense. Here's one just the other day, and we're going to talk a little bit about Iowa because let's put it all in context, which I've been trying to do for the last couple of days. Here's Cernovich taking a crack at Ann Coulter and Bob Vander Plaats. Now Ann Coulter just believes and pushes every single lie that ever had been, pushed on Donald Trump, foisted on Donald Trump since 2015. One of his biggest supporters. But I guess she didn't get enough credit. I guess she didn't get enough time. I guess she didn't sell enough books. I guess she wasn't relevant enough. So she turned on Donald Trump. Don't give me this crap about walls not being built. There was literally an interactive graphic on the Border Patrol website that showed you parts of the wall going up. Did it get completed? No. But large swaths of the damn wall went up, folks. Anyway, here's Bob Vander Plaats, a so-called Christian. All right. And I do say that so-called because for those of you who have been watching for a while, you know what my explanation is of the rise of the nuns in this country. And I think Dr. Steve Turley did a great job of explaining that nun does not mean I'm a non-believer necessarily, but it does mean I don't attend church. I don't have a church that I attend. And that church attendance is a great predictor of vote preference. So if you're a Republican, you want as many frequent, regular church attendees as possible in this country. Because the more people go to church, the more they vote Republican. But as Liat Saad at Gallup had pointed out in the past, as I have pointed out in the past, Christians did themselves in this country. The leaders, the so-called church, they did themselves in this country. And Cernovich here says, pastor at Bob Vander Plaats spreads a wicked lie that has been debunked since 2016. He claims to be Christian and is judging Trump. Will he apologize for his lie? Now, for those who don't know who Bob Vander Plaats is, he's got a very good record with people he has supported winning the Iowa caucus. However, he has never gone up against a former president that ended Roe v. Wade. He has always been anti-Trump. He has been a vehement never-Trumper his entire career. He's one of those chameleons that when Trump was president, he pretended like he was an avid and fervent supporter of him in order to be able to survive and thrive like everybody else. But the minute he got a chance to stick a knife in the president's back, he did it. What was his problems with Donald Trump in 2015 and 16? He's an untested New York City liberal. He's voted for Democrats. He's donated to Democrats. He doesn't really want to end Roe v. Wade. He's not telling you the truth. How could we trust this billionaire white guy from New York City? He said good things about Planned Parenthood in the past. He's one of these guys who literally has absolutely no reason left to dislike Donald Trump other than he is out of the circle. And many of these people who have been either expelled from Trump world or never warmed up to it are now pretending as if they're taking a principled stance against the guy who commands a majority of the Republican electorate, who is being persecuted for doing things that presidential candidates supported by Bob Vander Plaats in the past could not get done. Ending Roe v. Wade, opening up Anwar, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, making a bill so that bureaucrats at the VA, at the Veterans Administration, could be held accountable. There are many of these, and some of them don't even sound that big. The first overhaul to the U.S. tax code in 31 years. Some of them don't even sound that big, but they're big in Washington because they're big promises. People have made them for many and many of decades. And nobody stuck by it because whether it was Barack Obama, George Bush, the minute they got in the office, they were inundated with CIA and NSA and DNI and others. If Mr. President, if you move that embassy, the Palestinians are going to flip out. Iran will fund terror attacks and the missiles will rain down on Jews and Arabs alike. Not Trump. I don't give a damn. I promised it. I'm going to do it. So what's his problem with Donald Trump now? Same thing, as if nothing's changed. But let's put this into perspective because he and others have been taking pod shots. Here he is pushing the lie that Donald Trump mocked a reporter for a disability. When this is one of the worst lies. And there's Robert right there in that thread. People of faith love Trump. They don't sell out religious leaders like you. They don't sell out religious leaders like you who lie and libel. Folks, this is a lie. This was a cut video. Donald Trump had made those motions numerous times to mock many different people. Also, in the way Ted Cruz spoke, how he handled himself, his mannerisms. He was not mocking a reporter for being mentally disabled. But it's a lie the left grabbed onto, and it's a lie the rhinos grabbed onto. All these years later, you would think they have something new to tell the caucus goers of Iowa. Instead, they recycle the same lies. It's honestly quite incredible. All right, so one more here before we move on, because I think that it's important that we show you, put this into perspective, because I just don't see. Things are totally different. It is 16, but it's 16 on steroids. Keep that in mind. They're using the same playbook, but things are very, very different than they were back then. Yet they expect a different outcome. And here's Cernovich, all the lowlives and fake Christians who were never Trump in 2016 have found their new candidate in DeSantis. This is a man who supported Ron DeSantis. You know it, and I know. He was a Trumper in 16. I think he is one of the few, and I'm going to say this, and I know a lot of people are going to give me a hard time, but it is my personal belief. I know Mike, and I'm telling you, some at least of his grievances were at least legitimate. Mike Cernovich did not turn on Donald Trump because he didn't sell enough books or he didn't get enough fame or notoriety. Mike's turned on him because he didn't, quote, trust the plan. Like all the DeSantis surrogates were doing, if they were even around back then. That's what they were doing in the first half of the Trump term. Trust the plan. Michael Flynn isn't really being prosecuted. He's just kind of giving himself up so they could play this game of 4D chess. The loss of the family house is all for show. White hat Robert Mueller's going to take everybody down. Obama's going to jail. QAnon told me. Don't you follow these chants? This guy is super secret, top secret level clearance. Trust the plan. Meanwhile, Mike Pence, who everybody 4 years later found out is a dirtbag, is leaking to the press constantly. The national security team is constantly undermining him. Fortunately, these wicked liars lack legitimate influence. Hillary lost, Trump won. But keep in mind what's happening. This is majority of DeSantis's 2024 support. It is. This is DeSantis's most stalwart block of supporters. This is them. We're going to find out whether Bob Vander really has influence, because as it turns out, as it is right now, the flock is not listening to the shepherd. The flock is giving the shepherd a big fat middle finger. Go yourself. That is what the flock is doing. Here's why. Whoops. There we go. Hold on. Never mind. Moving in, putting this into perspective real quick. Let's rewind to 2016. Ted Cruz barely beat Donald Trump, who did lead in some of the Des Moines Register polls. There were a few things that happened that you need to keep in mind for context. One, Donald Trump ditched a debate hosted by Fox News. He said, up yours. I'm not going to this last debate. I am, there's nothing to gain here. I've already spoken to the voters of Iowa, and they're going to make their decision, and that's it. Trump in some polls did lose some support over that. However, he still would have won the Iowa caucus if it wasn't for a dirty little trick that people like Bob Vander played on poor Ben Carson. All right, so the bottom line is Ben Carson was struggling going into Iowa, but he had some support. The polls didn't show he had a whole lot, but it looked like he had more support on the ground than the polls indicated, and he did. And Team Cruz, and it was only because of Breitbart, they got a hold of some of this stuff. Team Cruz starts sending out emails, doing robocalls, instructing precinct captains to tell precinct captains for the Carson campaign and people who were going to caucus on the way in. That's why we have entrance polls in Iowa. That basically Ben Carson has dropped out of the race and is now encouraging his supporters and precinct captains to caucus for Ted Cruz. As even Karl Rove admitted about my math, maybe less than a week after the Iowa caucuses, that absolutely cost Donald Trump the Iowa caucus. There were enough precinct captains and precinct caucus goers who believed that grift, who were tricked, that were supporting Ben Carson to sway the caucus and give it to Cruz. That happened. You may remember shortly thereafter, Ben Carson does officially get out of the race, and what does he do? He endorses Donald Trump. Pissed off, no doubt, about what they did to him in Iowa. Now, let's get back to this. All the same pastors who are doing this, include, you have Bob Vander leaders and stuff, All these same people who are backing DeSantis in Iowa now also back Ted Cruz unanimously in 2016. And yet he's still, even with the grift, he's still only won evangelicals by 12 points. More perspective. That was after the dirty trick with Carson. And it was when Trump was being painted by his opponents as not a true conservative. He's an untested, untrustworthy liberal from New York City. He was not a former president with a record they love, including a record of ending Roe v. Wade. The issue and that Supreme Court decision had dominated the Iowa caucuses for decades, on the Republican side especially. It was the litmus test for how conservative you were. Here's a little kicker. Most evangelicals don't give a damn about abortion right now when you ask them. That's not their concern. Their concern is economic, and their concern is about the administrative state. They want to beat Joe Biden. That's what they're concerned with. And even among the 15 to 20% who will tell of evangelicals, who will tell pollsters that abortion and other social issues are their number one issue, that is what they'll be caucusing over. Trump leads with them as well, between 5 and 11 points. We digging back not only in our own polling, but Fox News polling that just came out, Manhattan Institute polling. He leads with these voters as well. Now, among evangelicals overall, he has a lead right now that Ted Cruz never had, even with the backing of these so-called religious leaders. Cruz, in the final Des Moines Register poll, had a lead over Donald Trump with evangelicals in Iowa of 10 points. According to the entrance polls in Iowa, Ted Cruz won evangelicals by 12 points. So here's the kicker for all of these, because I'm getting really pissed at these people who don't know anything about polling. They don't look, polling has had problems, and my industry deserves fair criticism, but it also deserves to be defended against unfair criticism. They're not fabricating this shit, folks. They're not making this up out of whole cloth. Even the Trump plus polls, like the Des Moines Register poll in 2016, the ones that had Donald Trump winning the Iowa caucus, the Des Moines Register was among those who showed a more considerable lead. Emerson, I believe, was only Trump plus one, something very, very close. Even the Trump plus polls, they weren't wrong because they understated Ted Cruz's support among evangelicals. They were wrong because they didn't project the share correctly that evangelicals would make up of the entire caucus goer population. In other words, in the Des Moines poll, for instance, they only projected about 47% would be evangelical. It was more like 64. And that's how Cruz was able to eke it out. That, again, along with the grip. But the preference margin, the vote preference margin was correct. It is difficult to see how Bob Vander Plaats or anybody, especially using 6-year-old left-wing media lies and smears and lies and libels, it is difficult to see how any of these people, the same old tired group, is going to overtake Trump at all, but especially even in Iowa with evangelicals when his lead is currently around 30 points. 3 times the size of the lead that Ted Cruz had in 2016. And by the way, a lot of the polls that show Trump in the 40s in Iowa, I spoke to his campaign about this. Their own internal poll I criticized right to their face. You're projecting that evangelicals are going to be 45% of the electorate. They were 60+% in 2016. 45% of caucus goers in 2016, despite the Des Moines Register poll totally missing it, were first-time caucus goers. You know how many tell us they're going to be a first-time caucus goer this time? About 43%. And we even tried to understate or at least be conservative with the share that would make up evangelicals, because that is a broad characterization. Are you an evangelical? Sure. Are you a cultural evangelical? It's very different than are you a weekly attendance at least evangelical? And Barnes and I talk ad nauseum about these people, and that's why Ron DeSantis can't even convincingly carry the state of Iowa against Ron DeSantis. That's why in our Iowa poll, it was Trump +8, but DeSantis basically even with Biden at 38%, because he can't win these people. Bob Vander Plaats is a joke. And he's about to take his first L now. And because the only reason why these polls have Trump in the 40s in the first place in that state is because they are underestimating how large the share of the evangelical vote will be. Just like Ann Seltzer, who comes from that damn state, did it in 2016. Because, right, Robert, a cultural evangelical is not the same, brother. It is not the same as a weekly attendance evangelical. And if you're only counting them and you think evangelicals are going to be 45% of the electorate, you may get an ass whooping and a rude awakening on caucus day when they turn out to be 65%, like they were in 16 altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why Vanderplatz is going this far in. I mean, for
Lies, Robert?
yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, I get he's on the DeSantis camp. He's never been a Trumper. He was anti-Trump in 2016, but he built a reputation as being having this kind of voodoo connection to the Iowa electorate, when really he was just usually reflective of your church-going evangelicals
Right.
who are consistently underrepresented in the Iowa caucus polls because they're often as much as 60% of the Iowa
That's right.
caucus polls. But but it's been clear for a while that that voter group is as pro-Trump as everybody else is. I mean, the only real core hostility to Trump are post-college, urban, upper middle class, professional, managerial class, younger Republicans. Well, younger and older. I mean, age-wise, the same. It's more the socioeconomic status. That's the only group that DeSantis is competitive has ever been competitive with against Trump, and that group is underrepresented in Iowa. And it'd probably be useful to show people again that if you just look at the percentage of college and post-college educated, particularly post-college educated by state, you can pretty much predict how well
Yep.
Trump did in the state.
Yep.
Um, it's why some of these idiots running around saying, let's have a test to exclude working class people. I mean, how dumb does Darren Beatty have to be? That he's running around saying, let's have a literacy test.
I saw this. Let's talk about this, brother. Doesn't he
I mean, can you
understand?
remind people we've imposed literacy tests many times? It never worked to the benefit of populist conservatives or working class people. It works to the benefit of aristocratic elites every single time.
Yeah, they're just going to end up first of all, there are more credentialed people. There will be more credentialed people on the Democratic side. That's just how this is going to work out. It's not even a matter of party. It's a matter of socioeconomic status. That's
Yeah.
how these things have always come down. That's why populists and typical
It's where they get their
conservatives
power
get
and their
the ass
wealth
end of it.
from. They get their
Yeah.
power and wealth from their parasitic relationship to the state. The entire
Yeah.
professional
Bad
managerial
idea.
class does. That's why you
Yeah.
have idiots as judges and idiots as lawyers and idiots as doctors. They use the licensing, the test taking. They love tests. The idea that, the Democrats are so terrified. No, they're not. They use tests to filter you out.
And I
To keep
understand,
you out.
Robert. I understand why he'd want that. I understand that. It's raw. It's folly, because it's the same reason why, Republicans wanted to legislate morality for a really long time. And then what happened when you gave the power of the state, the power to the state to legislate morality? When their version of morality changes, then you get things rammed down your throat, like Roe v. Wade and Ogerville versus Hodges. So that you're doing that essentially. And here's just goes to what you were just saying. If you look at Iowa by education, this is DeSantis and everybody's real problem. And I swear these people like Kyle Condit must have watched Inside the Numbers and wrote an article on the University of Virginia. We were just talking about the beer and wine track. And the bottom line is that the death knell came when Trump began winning back 4-year college grads. And even in Iowa, if people can see this right, he leads with high school or less 62-15. He leads with some college associates 54-21. He's now even leading with the 4-year degrees 45-18. And only advanced and post grads are tied at 26 between him and DeSantis. That's it.
Yep.
That's it.
And that group is underrepresented in Iowa. It's underrepresented almost every key primary caucus state. I mean, that's where on paper, because of the changing demographics of New Hampshire, with all these post-college grad people moving in from Massachusetts, contaminating the state, polluting the state politically. On paper, New Hampshire was DeSantis's best chance, not Iowa. But people like Bob Vanderplant and Steve Gase convinced them that they never understood it was because of who they were connected to, not their own political genius, that led to their prior perceived success. I shorted Trump in 2016 in Iowa because I knew the church-going evangelicals at that point was a weak link for him. It quit being a weak link when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I mean, that's been the number one issue of that group for 30, 40 years. and they're definitely not going to turn their back on Trump now. Everybody's rallying to Trump outside of a very small subset of the Republican electorate that has a disparate presence on social media, but is utterly disconnected from what actual voters think. And it's extraordinary. I mean, and that they keep thinking Trump is weaker and Trump can't win compared to any other Republican. It's like
So
Trump is
stupid.
the only one who can win. And they're just disconnected to the political reality of what's happening with voters on the ground.
You see, we got university and media pollsters using the term Trump or bust. Here we have the pollster for Suffolk University, who, by the way, I mean, this is identical to our poll in Iowa, which tells you that we are right. Suffolk and I both are right, that DeSantis struggles to even carry Ohio and Iowa, and it's a blowout for Donald Trump. And why is that? Because David put it right at the end of the tweet. 92% of DeSantis' voters would vote for Trump against Biden, but only 83 of Trump's voters would vote for DeSantis. A slice says Trump or bust. I mean, Robert, this is why, because you just said something that's totally right. Harry Enton tried to tell them with a wink and a nod in an article weeks ago that you made the wrong decision here going for Iowa. But the truth is, all of the never Trumpers are Iowa. They're all like, though that's that group of people in the Republican Party, the Ben Shapiros, the Steve Deeses. Do you remember Steve Deese he was in on the faithless elector scam? I mean, so these are people that couldn't stand Trump ever. And so they got DeSantis to move so far to the right, he is now at risk of not even qualifying to earn delegates in New Hampshire. When, as Harry Enton said weeks and weeks ago now, I think it was almost 2 months ago, that you should be going after New Hampshire because, number one, it has a better track record of predicting the overall winner because the electorate in New Hampshire is more reflective of some of the other states. And or at least used to be.
And it's a primary rather than a caucus.
That's right. It's exactly right. And they're more moderates and independents. And they, Trump, though, was always winning with them. It's just that his lead with conservatives was huge. With the first indictment with Alvin Bragg is when Trump started really winning like 2/3 of self-identified conservatives. And when you do that, it's a wrap. But this is what his stupid consultants told him to do. And they told him to do this too. Let's play a clip here, which I think is the end. It's been the end for a while, but I think this is really it. And for people who think I'm taking it out of context, I have a longer clip. I took it from California. But here is the 25 seconds. That was the dumbest thing Ron DeSantis has said yet.
Yes or no, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Whoever puts their hand on the Bible on January 20th every 4 years is the winner.
Okay, but respectfully, you did not clearly answer that question. And if you can't give a yes or no on whether or not Trump lost, then how can...
Of course he lost.
Trump lost the 2020 election.
Of course.
Okay.
Joe Biden's the president.
Yeah.
What do you say to this guy?
And he flirted around with that all the way through. And they're caught. They put themselves
there's more.
In a conundrum where their argument against Trump is that Trump can't win. Razor Fist did a fun rant on that precise issue.
That was great.
Persuasive argument, given that Trump already did win, and most Republicans would agree he won both times. In fact, Trump's never lost. So they're stuck with making the argument that Trump lost 2020 because they want to argue Trump can't win in 2024. And that makes them embrace the Joe Biden argument that 2020 was an honest election, a constitutionally honest election. And that just further isolates and marginalizes DeSantis from the Republic. I mean, at this point, I think it's only a matter of time before DeSantis is not even second. That he finishes third or worse.
Yeah.
And I mean, what a disaster. I mean, I thought it was political suicide to run this campaign in the first place. We talked about it at the time.
Yeah.
If you followed us on sports picks, .locals.com, we've been telling everybody to short DeSantis all year long. I mean, you've made about a 5-fold rate of return on your investment if you did that, as well as betting on Bobby Kennedy to surge, and he has. But, like in New Hampshire, some of the polls are showing Christie overtaking him. In Iowa, some of the polls are showing Vivek overtaking him. It's really, I have it's hard for me to see Vivek winning Iowa caucus. I mean, getting second in Iowa caucuses.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
But I mean, does Iowa still have the 15% minimum rule that you got to get 15%?
No. Let me just double check, but I don't think so. It's pure proportionality now in Iowa, if I remember correctly. Let me just double check. I have them all. I have all the
and they don't
rules
have to sit there and negotiate if they're under 15% for somebody to rally behind somebody else.
Democrats have a minimum threshold. It looks like they removed for Republicans the minimum threshold because it's not here this year. So, yeah.
I mean, that actually hurts all the Trump challengers because they won't be able to consolidate and pick off other people. They won't do how is it Ted Cruz stole all those Ben Carson votes in 2016?
That's right. This is what I was talking. I was bringing this. I'm not letting him get away with that. He only won the caucus because even with all of the Bob Vander Plaats and the religious leaders, he still would have lost the Iowa caucus if he didn't pull that trick on Ben Carson, which again, for people who are just tuning in, because I see a lot of new people jumped in. Ben Carson was screwed. That's why one of the reasons that he eventually went with Trump and endorsed Trump. They told Carson's voters through email, through phone calls, that even his precinct captains, that Ben Carson has suspended his campaign and he is encouraging every one of his supporters and his precinct captains to go to the caucus and caucus for Ted Cruz. And I did the math all the way back in 2016 to show people in what precincts, he needed this many to switch. And is there evidence that happened? There was, Robert. There was. Oh, yeah. Even Karl Rove had to go on Fox News and say, yeah, that happened. So Trump would have been the first nominee to win both Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, of course he did when he was the incumbent, but I mean, no Republican has done that in decades. Scott Walker had the power or the appeal to do it, but again, he let many of these same people in his fold, and George Will's wife, and many of these same advisors, and they destroyed his campaign. And this is, I mean, at first, it was months ago when I did the first comparison to Scott Walker with how he handled the Alvin Bragg indictment. It just reminded me of Scott Walker's kind of style. And it's been like Scott Walker ever since. And they're burning. They love these stories about Trump using PAC money to pay the legal fees because they're out of money. Because DeSantis's burn rate is even worse than Scott Walker, and Scott Walker never made it past Christmas.
Well, as they're watching him sink, they're going to burn that money even faster because they're going to be scared they're not going to get their grubby little hands on it.
That's right.
So they're like, what you need to do is you need to spend money here and you need to spend more money here. You need to give more money to me. That's what you need to do, Ronnie boy. And we're supposed to think he's going to be better picking personnel? I can't even pick a good campaign.
Give me a friggin' break, Robert. Give me a break. And that, you know what? That gets me to the next clip. Let me just play this other clip because it's one that I know you can't stand. I can't stand it because, Robert, during the pandemic, all I remember, and we pushed back on Trump listening to some people without a doubt. But I don't remember any of
we were more critical than almost anybody in the Trump world in 2020.
That's right.
But DeSantis is obviously no alternative.
The Will Chamberlains, all these people now support DeSantis.
But he actually moved. Will moved all the way down to Tallahassee, and then he got kicked out a month later. I hope that lease was short, Will. I mean, Will got inherited money, so Will don't have to worry about nothing.
As if in this interview, he couldn't have stuck his foot further into his own mouth. He does. It comes out his ass. Let's listen to this.
Here's the issue that I think is important for Republican voters to think about. Why did we have all those mail votes? Because of Trump turned the government over to Fauci. They embraced lockdowns. They did the CARES Act, which funded mail-in ballots across the country. Donald Trump signed that bill that funded the mail ballots that all the Republicans have been so concerned about. And also with the censorship of the Hunter Biden. That was Donald Trump's FBI that was working with that. He didn't have control over his own government. So me as the nominee, we will not let them run circles around us. We're not going to fight with one hand tied behind our backs. And so I think all of those issues were very problematic. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump helped facilitate that whole set of circumstances. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump helped facilitate that whole set of circumstances. I also think Republicans didn't fight back. You've got to fight back when that is happening, and you shouldn't have provided all the money to fund the mail-in ballots.
Meme team, they've been killing him. I'll tell you, man. Brendan Dilley's meme team, they've been, you know, you can call them, you can call Laura Loomer, whatever the hell you want. But if it wasn't for Laura Loomer, you know, she was the only one who listened when it came to this delegate fight in California. And I mean, you and I, we had to go like what on Twitter for 48 hours and point this stuff out.
Is there any update on the California delegate issue? Have they decided that yet?
Yeah, you're welcome, Donald Trump. That's the update. Because now not only did you know, they preserve the rule, and Harmeet, of course, is taking credit for it. Not only did they preserve the rule,
well, I'll give her credit for fixing the problem that she was part of creating. At least she fixed it, though. At least she realized political. But also, you know what that reflects? Dylan understands that DeSantis has no chance either. That, you know, that rule would have gone through, but for the fact that everybody can see DeSantis is a dead man walking.
Yeah,
and they're abandoning him en masse. I mean, when Rupert Murdoch recruits you and then dumps you a month into the race, that's right. You're finished. I mean, I mean, now what are the chances he does opt out, step back from the precipice, or is his ego so big that he'll convince himself he can march on?
So I don't know if you saw the quote I put up from a donor who was venting to me. And this is a donor who's been with DeSantis for a while and has given a lot of money. And let me just I'll use the pronoun they, because if I say which one it is, they might give it away to them. But they said he's not going to quit, that him and his wife are borderline delusional at this point. That all he listens to is Casey. He's becoming like increasingly, what's the word?
You know,
agitated. It's starting to. He's melting down. This is what happens with candidates, and it's sometimes they really go off, folks, like a bomb. And he's starting to. He was fully convinced that he would be the front runner at this point by now, and he doesn't feel. I asked them point blank if they talked to anyone about Florida. Like, are you aware you are down 25 points in your own home state? You're going to lose. And do you know what it means when you lose your own home state? You're not just a lame duck governor. You're a loser.
You become like Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush went from future president to somebody people laughed at. I mean, he became a universal butt of a joke. I remember Trump was having fun with this one. Little late, this after Jeb had dropped out, and he mentioned something about you know, had to take on these people, had to take on Jeb Bush, and somebody in the audience said, low energy, and Trump started laughing, and he goes, that's what you call branding, folks. I mean, he had permanently branded him in ways that everybody thinks of Jeb as the guy that says, please clap.
Please clap. I mean,
that's where DeSantis is heading. He's heading into Jeb exclamation point territory, and it's clear he doesn't have, he has the same weakness that Trump did. He doesn't have competent, capable people around him. It's clear he doesn't. In fact, he has some of the most incompetent, incapable people around. When you got people like losers like Bill Mitchell, John Cardillo, I mean, these guys are the gutter. This isn't the B team or the C team. This is the F+ team. I mean, this is not good. And I think if he was smart, but you know what? The money people probably knew what we had talked about, which is Casey, that his wife is key to him. And they must have really worked her over and they must have developed that kind of symbiotic relationship. We're like, yeah, you're going to win. You're doing great. You stay thing. Yeah, you know it, Casey. You understand. Yeah, those drapes should be purple rather than red, in the White House. I mean, they must have worked her over good. And she is getting played.
Early, Robert, don't you know how hard it is to get juice out of early 18th century French carpeting? Who would have French wallpaper? And these people are freaking delusional. But here's the latest. The latest is he will not drop. That they really, are being told he's not.
Well, then my prediction that his political future was finished is going to come true. At least presidential future, but he's on board to. I mean, look at Jeb Bush. I mean, Jeb Bush completely disappeared. I mean, that's the status. Well, look at Poppy Bush Jr. there, Jeb's son, I think, Jorge Bush, that was in Texas. He got crushed in the attorney general's race.
Yeah,
I mean, now they're trying to impeach him, of course, but the Paxton. But yeah, so I mean, that's the risk he's facing is oblivion. But how much money do you think Murdoch guaranteed him in the book deal?
At least $10 million, I guess. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And another reason why he's apparently not leaving is because they have, and I started off the show saying this, like 2016 on steroids. They have, and I kid you not, folks, do you remember about a month or two ago when I was answering a Q&A, it became like Friday night news that I had said that they will try to use some kind of new obscure rule to remove someone from the ballot who's been charged with sedition or something in connection to that, and they flipped their shit. And I'm like, look, first of all, it was a hypothetical question I was answering. I wasn't claiming that, but thank you, because Rush, if he was alive, he would say the same thing. How they react is always when they let you know that you're over the target. So they knew that I was speculating.
When they went ballistic about Trump pointing out that DeSantis's only card left to play is Biden's lawfare against him.
That's exactly right.
And Dana Loesch, who's always been a grifter. I mean, this is somebody who's so bottom level grifter that she sold out Kyle Rittenhouse for her Black Rifle coffee endorsement.
That's it.
Mrs. Second Amendment. But remember how they all got on their high horse for about a week about how dare Donald Trump, Steve Deace, how dare Donald Trump suggest that we're trying to profit in the DeSantis camp from the lawfare. And then as soon as the new indictment comes along, what are like Kurt Schlichter and all these other DeSimps doing? Oh, because of the indictment, Steve Deace, because of the indictment, we really need to move on from Trump. That's why they went berserk. Well, the way somebody taught me to say it is only a stuck pig squeals.
Yep.
And so when you hear them squealing, you know that you stuck them right.
And this is what comes out of Tim Miller now, who's been on the campaign trail in Iowa alongside the DeSantis campaign.
And for those don't remember, this is the Tim Miller that was Jeb Bush's guy.
Yeah, and it says Team DeSantis considers the long game and makes the case for nobility. And then it's like hyphen, no, really. And at the bottom line, at the end of the day, what it is convention madness. That's the plan. So DeSantis
he thought this was going to pull off with the Ken Cuccinelli.
It's the same thing all over again.
Who's helping run DeSantis's campaign? Told Trump's people not to let that schmuck in
anywhere near the administration.
Yeah, anywhere near. And he was even orchestrating. I was not part of a post after the election challenging certain election law change issues. I was part of the initial group, and then they put Ken Cuccinelli in charge. And I'm like, no, I'm out of here. I'm not working with that schmuck. That's who that. And people don't know Ken Cuccinelli is the guy who tore his delegate card on the convention floor to try when they tried to do a coup against Trump in 2016.
Yep.
And Trump was way too generous in giving that guy a job in the federal government. Now, I think Trump 2024 is 25 onward. He's not going to employ these people. I mean, that's the other mistake I think they've made is they're like, look, after 2016, Trump hired a bunch of them. So surely, he'll build back bridges, so to speak. And he won't have any kind of revenge on his mind. This Trump is a much more aware Trump, not as aware as he needs to be, but nowhere near where he was in 2018 and 19 when he thought he could work with the Republican Party.
Listen to this. You guys are going to love this. So, and because I know that this is absolutely the truth, but at least one of Trump's opponents, and that is DeSantis, is wondering if the front runner's legal troubles could change the calculus and require candidates to stay in for the long haul in order to try and amass delegates in case there is a convention battle because the former president is otherwise indisposed, meaning jail, folks. They're counting on Donald Trump being incarcerated. This is about meeting the moment while also thinking long-term, the DeSantis super PAC staffer told him on the condition of anonymity. The long-term game theory takes into consideration what might happen should the January 6th trial move fast enough to prevent Trump from accepting the nomination. If the legal calendar presents that possibility, might his opponents have to consider earning as many delegates as they can ahead of a convention fight rather than dropping out of the race once it's clear they can't win? Get this, here we go. This possibility could be simply the case of consultants with a lot of super PAC dough trying to ride their moneymaker as long as possible. And that was the kicker. It's just what Robert just said, folks. And that was the point of the conversation I was having with that donor, because they were presenting to her that this is a long battle, that Trump will be removed from the ballot. He has too many felonies and the conviction rates are too high. This is what they were trying to sell them. And she's asking me, can this guy win from jail? Can he win from jail? Like, you know,
No, he can. He would.
I said, are you kidding me? Nelson Mandela, you know, with all the trimmings. Are you kidding? If we're going to put in the poll, one of our listeners, watchers had suggested this on Friday, and I loved it. You know how we've been asking whether or not people won't vote if they do something like this to Trump, or if he's not the nominee. So they were like, why don't you ask whether or not people write his name in? You know, because he won in some obscure fire marshal election out in like Washington State or something, dude.
Somebody made him fire marshal.
I really think there would be like 10 million write-in votes at least. I don't know. We're going to find out, you know, but I see it.
And I'm not, I don't think the Republican Party is suicidal enough to actually try to steal the nomination from him. In 2016, there was lots of plots to do it. I don't think there's not, and where that is showing up is in endorsements. In other words, if there was enough institutional weight to really steal it from Trump and say, well, we'll take the hit in 2024, but it's worth it for the future of the Republican Party or down ballot, whatever bad analysis they would have, that would be showing up in people not willing to endorse him right now. House members, senators, governors. Instead, Trump is monopolizing those endorsements.
Yeah, he's killing it. He's killing it.
That's something he never had this in 2016.
Yeah, no, his winning brought them over. He did not have their front-loaded support like this. And at the end of the day, like this is all built on the research that started with the Party Decides. And it is true what 538 says. I hate to admit and give them credit when they're right, that they can be just as predictive as polls, you know, but the bottom line is that they score them by points for a reason, because you do see DeSantis's people talk a lot about state offices they got, local people they got. That doesn't really matter, Robert. National offices and gubernatorial offices are what matter. And, you know, after that last and final indictment, the Alabama delegation gave the DeSantis team and all these anti-Trump forces a big middle finger, because this is why I want to get in the case with you a little bit, because this indictment was the indictment. Forget about Fannie, the loser in Georgia. This indictment was the indictment that they have all been waiting for. Jack Smith indicting him over January 6th is the one that they have been telling donors for months. This is going to do it. This is going to do it. This is going to do it. So that's why they flipped out so much. That's why Reuters gave them a fake poll showing half of Republicans wouldn't vote for him. You remember those polls back in 2016? They did the same thing. They did it. According to that poll, a quarter of Floridians would vote for a quarter of Republicans in Florida would vote for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. That didn't happen. He took more Democrats than she took Republicans. And secondly, they also released polling after he was impeached for the first time that said they would never vote to reelect him.
They thought impeachment would severely hurt him politically. And it didn't, because it was an incredulous impeachment. And because, I mean, like, that's the difference. Like, people would ask, what would be the value of impeaching Biden when the Senate's never going to convict? And it's because, unlike the Trump impeachment, the media had been hammering Trump all the time with every fake scandal around. By contrast, we know about the Hunter Biden, Devin Archer, all of those developments. But the mainstream media has still mostly blacked that out. ABC, NBC, CBS, local affiliates, MSNBC, even most of the time CNN, are not covering it at all. They're giving it no coverage whatsoever. And so what the impeachment of Biden would do is force them to cover it, because they can excuse not covering it as long as it's a committee hearing. Once it's an impeachment proceeding of the President of the United States, they can't refuse to cover it.
That's exactly right.
And so it would force that into the rest of public consciousness. And that would be the value of it. But I mean, it's clear what they think. They think that they're going to get they have a clown circus, a kangaroo court with a bunch of lynching, bigoted jurors and judges that will race the case forward and hang Trump before Election Day. And then the electorate will then finally realize that Trump is unacceptable and Trump will be dumped. Not so much for the Republican nomination. I think they're trying to time it for the general election. And so
what are the odds of that, though, Robert? Like, the court process. What are the odds of that? And then there's something else.
No constitutional process would result in that fast of a trial. But the judge he has is one of the worst
Bad
he could have. Yeah, from Jamaica originally. It has a British colonial mindset. I mean, people forget a lot of these so-called black liberal Democrats from Jamaica that are lawyers and doctors. They come from the slave-owning class of Jamaica, not the slave class of Jamaica.
Like Kamala.
Like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris comes from a long line of slave owners.
Yep.
Joe Biden comes from a line of slave owners. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the only presidents to not come from slave-owning families with certainty is in the recent eras, Kennedy and Trump. Clinton had slave ownership ties. The Bushes, of course, had slave ownership ties. Obama, he too did not come from any. He had no ancestors that had ever been slaves. Right, first black president, the first president of a part of the country that main distinguishing factor is that their ancestors were enslaved in America, had no slave ancestors at all. He did have a whole bunch of slave-owning ancestors, though. And it tells you something about those people when you know that. I mean, you wouldn't think it's as predictive as it really is in mindset, approach, etc. Certain cultural transmissions, certain narratives get transmitted over generations by the stories that get told and the values that are held. And I mean, that's what we do when you put in the ancestral information in the polling data, you get to see how great grandfather's experience coming over, say, from rural Denmark, the conservative populist part of Denmark, has a major impact on their voting differences between the people who came from Stockholm, even if they're living next to each other in Minneapolis, and so or Madison. So I think that political tradition is really robust. But this judge is so bad, and the chief judge signaled to the judge that she can do whatever she wants.
Yeah.
Because the chief judge with other judges sat in on and were so
unbelievable,
gleeful.
Robert. Unbelievable.
Yeah, for those who don't know, went to the arraignment, watched Trump get arraigned, couldn't wait for it. The magistrate, made sure to call him Mr. Trump, not Mr. President.
Mr. President, yeah.
I mean, I wonder what would have happened if I would have referred to that judge by her name and said, "Oh, Mrs. Johnson, how are you?" They would have had me in contempt in half a second. It's extraordinary. The entire DC court system has contempt. They are the swamp system. They are the representation of the swamp. That's why we shouldn't. Now, I'll give Trump credit. We've been talking about this for a while. Trump came out and said, "Time to get rid of DC. Time for Congress to take back over DC. Time to get rid of the federal court system. Get rid of the state court system." And by the way, those kind of institutional reforms are the kinds that will actually terrify the deep state.
Yes.
Take away their money, take away their institutions of influence,
yep.
And then they all of a sudden will wake up to the threat. Trump first term was only somebody who was a stopgap on their agenda. A Trump second term is going to be endangering their institutional power permanently. And that's the right approach to take. So normally, no chance this trial would take place before Election Day. But with this corrupt of a judicial system, they will try. They will try to get this they will try to get this probably in March, February, April. Now, they have some conflict issues because New York has set its trial for March. The Florida case currently has its trial set for May. This trial could easily, if it's properly done, go 6 weeks, 8 weeks, because they put the entire 2020 election at issue.
Well,
and why he believed what he believed.
This is before.
That would be weeks and weeks of testimony.
Want to get into his, this idea, because some of the legal analysis I've been hearing.
Think about it. They'll probably try to schedule this trial for August, post convention, right before the general
post convention. So yeah, that's how can you go to the court and say, no, Your Honor, I'm ready to go, and then hand down new indictments 2 weeks later. Robert, this is my, I guess, before we get into his state of mind and what they would need. This is something Mark Levin said. I want to get you to react to it. Actually, when we put it up originally on Friday, people were like, I wish Barnes was on so he could give his answer. We had Daniel Street on, I think it was Wednesday. He addressed this, but I've heard you talk about this as well. Mark Levin puts out this very lengthy tweet. And then at the very end, talking about everything we have been talking about for years, which is it's not just that the judges are corrupt. It's not just the system itself is corrupt. There is no way to get a fair trial. We have the data to prove it. There is no way Donald Trump could possibly get a fair trial in this ideologically possessed population of potential jurors. There's just no way. And so he goes on this lengthy thing, and then he says, therefore, I want to publicly encourage the Trump legal team to seek an emergency hearing before the U.S. Supreme Court, not to resolve legal disputes, but to at least temporarily halt the abomination of this legal warfare that is unfolding in front of us, where Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans are unashamedly celebrating the use of the courts by the Biden administration and Democrat DAs to further their political wishes, as the rest of the nation watches in shock. This unprecedented legal warfare requires an unprecedented response by the only constitutional body left that can do something about it, the Supreme Court. So normally the court just doesn't get involved this early. You got to let the process play out. But is there a case here, Robert? And is there a possibility? Is there a case to be made? It's not only everything you and I have just said, but Jack Smith is like one of maybe 4 federal prosecutors who have been unanimously rebuked by the Supreme Court. This is a scumbag. This is a known scumbag player. These are crazy, unprecedented actions. Is there at least some way? Is that viable? What he's asking, is that viable?
Not in the way he's talking about.
Yeah.
The way in which you can bring it up to the U.S. Supreme Court is that you need denial of relief from the district court. So that's where, like, now the protective order gives them an early opportunity. If the judge denies them the opportunity to publicly discuss evidence in the case, then there's 2 different individuals. Trump has a right to challenge that. But some smart third-party media organization should file their own petition against the motion for protective order. In fact, there's actually a protocol to do that in the D.C. court system. I'm a member of the federal D.C. circuit, D.C. district. So it's not that hard to do it. And they would have their own right independent right to appeal that to both the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. And I think that would give it a little more potency. But basically what you need is for the Supreme Court to have the legal authority to do something about the Trump case requires the district court deny relief and the Court of Appeals deny relief first. Now, that's where bringing early motions to disqualify, motions to transfer for venue, motions to dismiss, all of those you might want to bring earlier than you otherwise would in order to get those issues up before the Supreme Court, because ultimately that's what the Supreme Court could say the motion to disqualify should have been granted. And that assigns a whole new different judge and sends a signal to the D.C. district they're not going to be able to run ramshot over Trump. Or they could transfer it out. They could say the motion to transfer for venue should be granted. Now, what is neither the Court of Appeals nor the Supreme Court has to handle. The Supreme Court never has to handle anything. The U.S. Court, the District Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeals only has to handle a final judgment. And there's some people getting confused out there. I know Leslie McAdoo Gordon and other people are talking about when you can appeal as a matter of right versus interlocutory appeal.
Right.
I wouldn't get obsessed with that issue. All you care about if you're in Trump's camp is giving them an excuse to take the case, giving them an opportunity to take the case. The fact they don't have to take the case isn't your concern. Your concern is giving them a chance to take the case. Do they have the power to? And on any time the district court denies a relief or remedy, that allows Trump to go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court can be limited to the specific issue presented to it, but that doesn't limit their opportunity to make a political statement, frankly, that could send a message to everybody that this is not going to be tolerated. I think as a practical matter, what people like Levin are seeing is that the federal district court in D.C. is so bad that they don't recognize what every other court is even recognized. Even the New York court has recognized, which is that these are extraordinary proceedings and that they need to be careful and cautious about what they do. Because, I mean, that's a liberal Democratic hack in New York.
Oh, my
But
God.
he didn't issue any gag order. He didn't issue any detention conditions. He didn't threaten the president. He didn't. In fact, he turned down their effort to Alvin Bragg to subpoena Melania Trump's private emails and texts. Why? Because he knows the whole world is watching and the president of the United States and future president is on trial. And so, but the DC court system doesn't care.
They don't give a
They
damn.
can't wait to lynch him. And they're just like white racist in 1950s Birmingham. They don't understand or appreciate how much the whole world is not going to like seeing them rise to power. Like, it was one thing to kind of know of the stories in the South about how blacks were being treated. It was a whole different animal to watch it live on TV.
Such a good
That's
point.
when the South lost. The South lost because the South was busy being the South. That the old aristocratic power structure put in after the not long after the Civil War in the so-called Redeemer South, what they did is disqualify almost the entire poor white population. By the way, most working class whites were disqualified to vote for most of that time period. People keep forgetting that using these literacy tests that people think are somehow that test could never be abused. It's like, oh my God. Vivek needs to go back to class. I get his proposals only 18 to 24-year-olds and all the rest, but it's an underlying fascistic notion when you say you should only have voting rights if you have given something to the state, community service, military service. That is opposite of what America is built on. The state's power comes from my consent. It's not that my power doesn't come from the state's consent.
I've wrestled with that myself, Robert, over the years. I'm a homeowner, right? I'm a business owner, and there's often times I think, well, why the hell do those people have the same say as me? But once you start to go down that rabbit hole, it gets real dark and real ugly. And so at the end of the day,
there is our path. I mean, study history, and it will answer all your questions about. I wonder how this will work out. Well, we got lots of examples, so we don't have to guess.
We do know.
Especially to tell the left that you could license voting, how that's going to be used. I mean, there'll be carve out exceptions for their constituencies and screw overs for your constituency. I mean, Barack Obama thinks no conservative should vote because he doesn't think they're literate enough. That's where. And the other thing is this tendency in the dissident right to flirt around with white supremacists, racists, white nationalists, quasi-fascist, monarchists. It's like they can't help themselves. The latest one was Richard Hanania, who turned out to be a racial eugenicist.
That's another one.
And Pedro Gonzalez.
That's who I was going to bring up. Pedro.
Notice all these guys became deeply anti-Trump overnight. No wonder. I mean, they don't need Epstein blackmail files. They have ideological blackmail files on these guys. So,
and they claim like a little bitch. I'm sorry, man. Like a little bitch. He blames Donald Trump. He's like, that's because I flirted with that world and I no longer hold those views. I have never heard anyone in Trump's world talk like that. Never. I don't know who you're
Trump's just the opposite.
Just the opposite.
I mean, Trump's always been the opposite. Trump's very comfortable in any cultural environment. I mean, that like when you watch DeSantis, you know he isn't going to look comfortable walking into, say, a black barber shop or a West Texas. I mean, not even amongst Latina Hispanics. Even though he's in Florida, you would think he would, but you can tell this guy is who came up with the idea to let him retail politic. He is one of the worst retail politicians I've ever seen.
They're broke. They have no choice anymore. This was supposed to be a big campaign, a big event style campaign. But the truth is they don't have the money to do it anymore, brother. I was trying to talk about this last couple of weeks. They're talking about this as if it's a retool. It's not a tip. All campaigns retool, reshape themselves. Famous one, John McCain in 2008, he had to retool and then he wound up being successful. This is very different. That's not what this is. They're out of money. And by the way, John McCain could retail. So when he gets back on the Street Talk Express and goes from diner to diner in New Hampshire, he can do that. Ron DeSantis can't do it. They're pretending this is a retool when what it really is they're reacting to being broke. And they have no funds for these big events anymore. They had to cancel 2 weeks ago, not this past weekend, the weekend before. They had to cancel 2 events, one in Southampton, the other one in the Hamptons, because people didn't want to show. They tried discounting the plate from 6,600 to 3,300. They had to cancel them both because there was no takers. And what do you think, speaking of donors, one thing this donor relayed to me, and I've heard a lot of people say something like this, other donors, bigger, smaller. I've heard a lot of people say this is somebody now who's getting frustrated. They want to beat Biden. They don't really like Donald Trump because they don't like his style, but they did like his policy. So that's where this donor falls in, right? Love the policy, don't like the man, and I want to move on from Trump. But now their main goal is different from a lot of these other mega donors. Their main goal is, I want to beat Joe Biden. I do think the country is in deep trouble. So that's why I think they're coming from a little bit more sincere of a place. What do you make of their comment? Because let me just make sure I say it exactly right. But basically that it's Ron DeSantis is allowing Jack Smith to do this. What do you make of this? Like, if Ron DeSantis and others weren't in this race, not only hoping for Trump to be arrested and, taken out of the way, but I mean, now they're openly just saying it, Robert. Now, it used to be 2 months ago when I would say that, they would attack me and smear me and he doesn't know what he's talking about. That was always their strategy. Now they're openly admitting it. And I think this is something that's making them uncomfortable because they never wanted that to be the case. They wanted Ron DeSantis to just win. And now, they were always uncomfortable with the idea of lawfare. Now they're feeling like, and I mean, if I could get the quote verbatim, it would basically be, if he just dropped the hell out and endorsed Trump, they wouldn't be able to do this. They would, or at least it would be much harder for them to do it. And by the way, there's an indictment waiting for Ron DeSantis too, just in case. There's an indictment over migrants to Martha's Vineyard. So that's next. I mean, these idiots think they can do a secret handshake in a dark room with the deep state and they're going to be left alone. You're out of your mind. If you ever become a threat to them, they have something in the barrel for you too, bro. I mean, it's so stupid. But what do you make of that? You think there's validity to that? Like, what they're basically saying is, if he just dropped out, they would have to back off. Or maybe if he never did this to begin with, they would have thought twice about these indictments. Because
I think the indictments were clearly now inevitable. I mean, I initially thought they had enough political acumen, enough survival instinct to realize that this would backfire, especially in the United States. I mean,
but now they have no choice, man.
Yeah, right? And I think it's what's become clear is 2 things. They see Trump as an existential threat.
Yeah, they do.
And secondly, they're very disconnected. It's very let them eat cake people. Like, for example, I often tell people, if I have a corrupt judge, I want them to be a dumb judge, because a dumb, corrupt judge is manageable because you can manipulate their lack of awareness against them. The most dangerous judge is a smart, corrupt judge, because a smart, and I mean smart in the sense of politically savvy, contextual understanding, etc., not necessarily whether they can, do deductive reasoning well. That's like your Ben Shapiro kind of intelligence. You give them a math quest. I call it math intelligence, and people misunderstand what I mean by that. But it's what I mean is that you give them a deductive reasoning test, and they do really well. You put them in a situation in life and they do terribly.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's
no
because,
street smarts.
yeah, exactly. They don't have the context, the personal narrative, the lived experience in order to be able to assess things. They don't have the proper methodologies. In fact, your intellectual class tends to be the worst at having good methodologies for approaching information, for approaching sources, for approaching understanding. And we've built a very dysfunctional, decrepit elite class personified perfectly by Joe Biden, frankly, in the degree of corruption and the degree of decrepitude and the degree of the late stage empire that, and people forget, you read about all the great civilizations over history, and when they're in the decline, they all have, there's pharaohs like your Bidens. There's your leaders like your in all of these regimes.
Yes.
And, there's your kings. There's, you name it. And people are like, oh yeah, then now we understand why they collapsed. This is what we have. And the scary thing is they're so disconnected, so out of touch that they endanger the world and definitely endanger America in the process. They're willing to, I don't think they realize they're willing to burn it all down to save their position. But that's because of limits on competence. I think if they understood that going through the trial and convicting Trump, of doing a show trial, of limiting his evidence, of limiting his speech, of limiting his jury selection and judge selection to bias people against him, they think that will endorse their worldview and everyone will rally to it. They don't realize it will have the exact opposite political effect. And in fact, what it will do is wake up people to get rid of these judges entirely. Say, DC, this system, you're gone. You're finished. Your history. That your entire, to look at their institutional tools of power and take all of them away. And because that required a radicalized electorate, a red-pilled electorate that could in turn directly influence people in positions of power to the degree that our deep state corrupted elected branches of government would actually respond to the people. Which, by the way, respond to one of the chats. One of the chats was like, oh, universal suffrage will lead to, leads to terrible things like everybody wanting freebies. Two problems with that. First, look at all of history. Everybody votes their economic self-interest. But what happens when you limit the suffrage to a few people? They want the freebies coming from everybody else, as in slave labor, as in labor abuses, as in human rights abuses, as in peasantry abuses, etc. So you don't solve that problem at all. In fact, you make it worse the more you limit the electorate. The second problem that's missed in all of this is most ordinary people have never wanted handouts. This is why welfare is still unpopular amongst welfare recipients. People don't like to get handouts. People like jobs. People like opportunity. People like land. People like property. People like capital that they can make something of themselves. So it misunderstands the average working class person to think that way. It tends to be what's fascinating is, imagine your Southern planter class, a class that was one of the least deserving classes to hold wealth and power in the history of humanity. That it was a class that was morally degraded and disgusting. It was a class that loved luxury for its own sake, that loved power over humans for its own sake, that never earned a dime of what they got, morally, economically, or otherwise, that they were thieves at core. You look at and they were willing to destroy America to keep their power and their privilege, and destroy the South along with them. That class of people, they were the kind of people, we can't give the power to these people because they'll misuse it. I mean, my God. It's like the people in the country club, sneering about the gardener or the landscaper. It's like, my God, the disconnect. And what is it with Republicans that they always are, that there's this country club instinct, this Mitt Romney, the 47%.
I was just going to bring that up. What damaged him so much about that 47% comment is that it's largely untrue. And he showed his ass. He showed his worldview to the American public about what he thinks about them.
A
And
guy, by
that
the way,
is
who never
what
earned
gave so
anything,
much
inherited
gas.
everything in his whole life, and then, was at a
Like,
hedge
how
fund.
dare you? Right.
Yeah.
Like, how dare you, you friggin' rich, privileged snob? How dare you? And that's why he was missing 3.5 million people in the Rust Belt who didn't come out for him and stayed home when he should have been able to beat Barack Obama. Barack Obama was beatable. Was he easy to beat? No, but he was beatable. It was just that Republicans picked the exact wrong candidate to do it. And they're gearing up to do, to potentially.
And that's what the establishment wants them to reoccur.
They want
I
them
think
to rehatch this.
we both agree that if Trump is not the nominee, particularly if it's by some sort of shenanigan,
They lose.
that Republican Party's DOA in 2024. And maybe DOA is a party altogether.
Robert, listen, think about this. I've been telling people, if you think Ross Perot was a fracture, this is going to make the Ross Perot fracture look like a paper cut. Because think about how, folks, go and look. You'll see he didn't just pull 10%, 5%. Ross Perot took 15, 20% of the party in some cases. He cost Republicans elections against Bill Clinton. They easily should have won, but it wasn't his fault. It was the Republican Party's fault for betraying part of their Reagan coalition, their Reagan Democratic base that would had thought about coming over and by the way, my family's part of them. I remember it like it was yesterday. They loved Reagan, but they hated George Bush. They did not like him. Why? He's the kind of guy who looks at his watch, folks. He doesn't care about you. He thinks he's better than you. And Republicans betrayed those people. So they abandoned the Republican Party for 10 years, Robert. I don't know that they could survive this. And people have been, like I see all the DeSantis supporters when I bring this up, throw their little hissy fits and, but he won Florida. Gubernatorial elections mean nothing. That's number one. They mean nothing. They have no predictive value whatsoever. Secondly, he's a Sun Belt governor.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with
he won
the rest
Florida
of the
at the time.
country.
He was seen as a deep within the Trump camp, too.
Yes, that's right. He won.
Not like right now, his numbers would not be nearly as good as it was in 2022. Not that it matters because he's not like going to run for re-election for governor, but I think he has hurt himself for any future statewide. And I don't know what, Scott's not going anywhere. Rubio's not going anywhere. Yeah. I mean, what does he do? What does he go to like run? My guess is he does the Barack Obama thing, speaking tours, the book deals, some think tank in Washington, tries to remind people how wonderful he is. Desperate, probably, maybe you think somewhere down the road he can get something. I don't think Trump is going to reward him with any position at all.
Would you?
I think that ship. I think what people don't understand is Trump saw 2016 very differently than this election. 2016, he saw as open competition, and somebody he beat, he was fine with putting in positions of power as he tried to work within the party structure after winning. He sees everyone running this time other than Vivek as a traitor. As a traitor to him personally, and that he's not going to forgive that.
He reposted the other day what I had said on Twitter. I saw him repost it on Truth because that's how much it burns him, because he's right. They keep talking about Ron DeSantis is always the underdog, yet he always wins. He would not have won if it was not for Donald Trump. Robert, you were there. You saw the polling.
Completely.
This is something they attack people like me and others. They're calling Mark Penn, they're attacking Mark Penn at Harvard. Like, a few of us were the only ones who were fair to your boss. And by the way, we were the only ones who had Florida going Republican in 2018. The only ones. So, but we were also truthfully acknowledging that he just went along for the ride. People came out in droves in 2018 for Rick Scott because they wanted to defeat Bill Nelson, and they did not want Bill Nelson to be a conviction vote in the Senate. So they came out for Rick Scott, who was seen as an ally of Trump, not Ron DeSantis.
I knew Bill Nelson's son years and years before that. That kid was as dumb as a doorknob.
He's not
can't imagine the old man was any brighter. But I think for the time being, Florida Democratic Party is kind of DOA.
For now.
Yeah.
He could
give for a period of time. I mean, they just now things can shift, but and that's the other thing is aside from the fact that I don't see Biden going anywhere, and I don't see Kamala Harris, definitely I don't see her going anywhere. this idea out there afoot that's popular within the DeSantis camp that it's going to be Newsom. Hence, they're setting up, the Newsom-DeSantis debate. I could care less about it personally.
It's a desperation move.
First of all, I see no sign in the Democratic Party that they're on board with that at all. Tons of money. Biden's campaign is going to be plenty well-funded. No issue there. Now, and it'll run mostly a TV media 2020 style campaign. You won't get out there and press the flesh much.
Yeah, he's going to run an air cover campaign. That's all.
Complete. Yeah, it'll be a pure air cover campaign. But he's got the money to do it. There's been very little dissent within the Democratic Party on that. You just have Robert Kennedy challenging from the populist left, but nobody on the institutional side. So I don't see any. I think they're stuck with Biden because if you look at Kamala Harris, there's no way she's going to let Newsom take it away from her. And then you have the third problem. So Biden's going nowhere, Harris going nowhere. Third problem is Newsom's not even popular or well-liked nationally.
Man, listen, first of all, I think he would wipe the floor with Ron DeSantis in a debate. This is coming from a desperation or a place of weakness. Months ago, when he was challenged to a debate, he thought he was going to be up on Trump's heels soon, so he didn't want to make a mistake in a debate with Gavin Newsom, and he declined it. Now, because he's 40 points behind, he needs some kind of desperate ploy to be able to pull some kind of views, get some kind of clicks, raise some kind of grassroots money. But at the end of the day, Newsom has a John Kerry problem, only with a different coast. He's going to be seen as a coastal liberal, and I just don't see it. And I just don't see it.
He's not even well-liked in California.
Yeah.
In his own state. This is a guy who faced a recall.
Yeah.
This is not some exceptionally. The guy who could have been a real competitor, Kamala Harris, helped take out Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, I was worried about Cuomo and Whitmer.
Been a real challenge to the. Yep. That's why she took him out. That's why she knifed it in. Using a little Me Too to do it.
Twist.
Exactly. What people don't understand is she can be as dumb as a doorknob in certain respects,
but ruthless.
But politically, she's not. She grew up under Willie Brown, and you think she was the first person to get tutored to want to use Willie to get access to power? So you got to give her some credit because she wasn't even the hottest girl in the room, and she had little Willie around her finger.
I'll tell you, man. There's a hilarious video from when Barack Obama was president, and you could see Michelle's face, man. She hates this woman. She can't stand her for good reason. Speaking of traitors, I gotta play this clip. This one of the things that bothers me the most, man. There's even talk that like Mike Pence could testify against Donald Trump. He
wants to, and he plans on doing it. That's why, to their credit, Trump's lawyer was out making the rounds Sunday, saying we have no doubt that Pence will be one of our best witnesses because, given what he wrote in his book. And as they were pointing out to Pence that does he want to be exposed as a perjurer for the entire world to see? And if he doesn't want to be, he might need to be careful about exactly what he testifies to. But I have no doubt he's already repeated a bunch of garbage before the grand jury. Because Pence was part of this whole deep state coup from day one.
Absolutely, he was. I was 10 feet away from this speech. I had to go pull it up because I remember it like it was yesterday. And for anyone who doubts that he was referring to the plan to object to electors, there's an NPR article that I got to show you, or at least a picture of. We don't have to read the damn thing, but it's very clear. The headline is Mike Pence is on board. So, here it is, 40 seconds. This is what Mike Pence said before he dropped the letter, which was the biggest coward move I've ever seen. But now I guess we know what really happened.
And as our election contest continues, I'll make you a promise. We're going to keep fighting until every legal vote is counted. We're going to keep fighting until every illegal vote is thrown out. We're going to win Georgia. We're going to save America, and we'll never stop fighting to make America great again. You watch.
What a complete fraud that guy.
What a fraud. I mean, Robert, and I'm telling you,
Truth.
be away with
You
Charlie.
think he even knew what he was reading? He's just good at reading these days. I mean, all these politicians, that's all they do. It's like, oh, yeah. It's like they didn't write it. They don't believe it. That they're almost indistinguishable from robots being up there in terms of them just repeating the garbage that gets fed in. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, Pence backs Republican lawmakers' plan to object to electoral college results. I mean, but he lied to everybody. I mean, that's how you partially knew it was an inside scam, like that's been reported now by the former Capitol Police chief and other high-ranking officials to Tucker Carlson, because he waited until right before the event to put out that letter reversing everything he had said before then, saying, oh, you know what? There is no power. Excuse me. There is no power for me to do anything about questioning or contesting electors, even though, again, John Adams had this precise issue before him. He had competing slates of electors, and he decided which ones he was going to pick. Thomas Jefferson, and by the way, he picked the ones that elected him president. Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson had the exact same option. And during this process, Alexander Hamilton was arguing against certain electors being counted and the vice president using his power to choose others. Major legal scholars, not just, there's the Wargaming, the Democrats and Never Trumpers with Bill Kristol and the rest did, where they discussed bringing elector challenges, including through the vice president. But you have law professors in 2020 who wrote about that there was a good legal grounds for the vice president to challenge electors. And now he's claiming that he always knew that was illegal and that Trump was trying to force him, by talking to him on the phone, to somehow do something illegal, even though it was so clear that he had the legal authority to do it. Even under the statute, I don't think the statute's constitutional because the Constitution.
Yeah, the Electoral Count Act. The
Electoral Count Act is. I mean, and by the way, that law professor said that exact thing in 2020. By the way, but even if you were to say the Electoral Count Act is constitutional, it provided for the vice president doing this. And how do we know? Because they went back and amended it to say the vice president no longer has that power.
Exactly. They would never have done that in 2022 or 2021. They never would have done that if there was no real authority for Pence to have, to have made that or potentially made that decision, which he didn't. But
and Pence is like Bob Vanderplatz, right? Mr. Religious, conservative, deep moral values. If you wonder why the ordinary, non-religiously observant voter is skeptical of the preacher side of the Republican Party, look no further than Mike Pence, someone who will lie with ease because these guys are frauds. These guys are fakes. These guys are like the Inquisition era Catholic Church. They're people not to trust. They're people to distrust precisely because of their claims to moral superiority.
Yeah, I got to be honest too, and I jump in topics here, but it's like 40 seconds. So I'm going to play it. I found Devin Archer to be a likable dude. Speaking of the Tucker Carlson interview.
He's an old school BSer. He was admitting to Tucker. It's all a scam here in D.C. It's all a crock. It's all
I got that. Yeah, here. Well, it's just I mean, he goes, well, you know how DC works. But then there's another 49 seconds where Tucker says, listen, he wants you to believe that there's no corruption here. This isn't about influence peddling. And here's what he has to say.
The reaction to what you've said in public, to what you said to the committee on the Hill, and doubtless to what you've been telling us in this interview, is that there's no corruption here at all. This is totally normal. Joe Biden had no role whatsoever in his son's business or knowledge of it. But
right.
That seems false.
Yeah, I think that's categorically false. I think that he was aware of Hunter's business. He met with Hunter's business partners. You found a letter that illustrates that he knew me.
And he's thanking you. He's thanking you for his efforts.
So I think that was, I think
your efforts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's not factually right.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole scam. The idea that this was Hunter's idea. No, this is how Joe Biden weaponized his office from the time he got elected the United States Senator. This has been Joe Biden's scam that he uses his brother, uses his sister, uses his son Hunter to execute the Joe Biden scheme. I mean, I knew this from personal professional experience. I had when Biden was vice president, the people would constantly, and I had never experienced this before, people would constantly come to my clients and say and there were people that were just part of Biden's world, Joe's world, not people who didn't even know who Hunter was, just part of Joe's world, and say, hey, for the right amount of money, we can make sure this criminal case goes away. And if you don't do it, it's probably going to get a lot worse. They were extorting my clients on a regular basis.
My God.
And I always had to tell the clients, stay away. You can't trust any of these people. And a lot of them were lobbyists, because what lobbyists are great at is selling illusions. I mean, that's the irony of the current Biden defense. Oh, he was just selling an illusion. How is that better? That's even worse. That's even worse.
So it's fraud and corruption.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, he wasn't he wasn't a corrupt taking bribes to change positions. He was a con man who was pretending he was going to do something in order for money, or taking credit for things that are actually outside of his control. Though that part is not true. I mean, that's what the Burisma thing confirmed. I mean, those Burisma guys were blunt about this stuff. And I mean, all the lies at the time were insane. And the way they got Zelensky to reverse course back then, I mean, that was the first sign that Zelensky had been captured by the deep state.
Absolutely.
He went from an honest conversation to Trump not long after he got elected to staying silent while Trump got impeached.
Absolutely.
Because he knew all the allegations were true concerning Victoria Nuland, concerning Joe Biden, concerning the deep state,
Lutsenko,
the Lindsey Grahams, the John McCain's. I mean, some people toast different events. I toast the anniversary of John McCain's death because he was one of the worst human beings to walk the planet.
What kind of piece of crap spends the last waning moments of his life doing what he did? Vindictively, first of all, betraying the people.
Same kind of guy who comes, whose wife has been loyal to him and gets injured, and he dumps her as soon as he can to marry up, money wise and otherwise. I mean, he was always pure scum. I mean, the guy was pure unbridled scum who did some of the worst damage to anybody, to countries and nations anywhere in the world. I personally loved it when Trump said, "I prefer my heroes."
I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah,
I thought it was hilarious. And by the way, speaking of which, you'll probably be on like Sean Parnell's show tomorrow. He's doing a radio show, and we're going to talk about the election stuff. Him and I have talked about this. Like, you betrayed us. You betrayed us. All of us who wanted to serve after 9/11. Everyone's so proud. We're all proud of our service. But at the end of the day, looking back all these years, it's like, what do you mean we're going to pivot to Iraq? What are you talking about? And all these lies they told. And then I think even live in an interview with Sean, he heard the same lie I heard with Pat Tillman. They got Pat Tillman men and people like John McCain using it for rallying cries to get more money, to piss off soldiers. So you go out there and kill more for them. It's the most scumbag stuff any human being could do when they spend their time on this earth in the brief amount of time they have, and for this guy to put his family on hold, put everybody on hold just to come back to DC, betray his voters, all because he's jealous that Donald Trump is president. He's not. He's an angry Donald Trump. He doesn't personally like Donald Trump. To put his crusty, disgusting, immoral finger down on the repeal and replace, which broke a 7-year campaign promise Republicans made to the American people. I mean,
and was the reason why he himself got reelected to the Senate, because he was in trouble in Arizona.
Yeah, he went after Dr. Ward so hard in that primary. She's a liar. I'm the one I've led the fight to repeal Obamacare. I've led the fight to secure the border. He took it to her, man, and they ran her through the mud. And anyone who's met her will tell you, I mean, I when I first met Kelly Ward, I actually thought, like, this woman's so normal.
Yeah.
This is not at all what has been portrayed in the media. I did not expect her to be. So,
and she was the one who organized the only successful signature match sampling out of the 2020 election with her election contest brought in Arizona. That showed that, in fact, when you did a sample, the Democrat Party's own expert came in and concluded more signatures didn't match on a prorated basis than the margin of victory. And it wasn't just slight. There were 10 times more signatures that didn't match than the margin of victory. And if you project the sample he did and that was the Democratic Party's expert who can testify to that. And then the Arizona court had to flip their thing. They're like, well, now we think you have to prove that that was fraud.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not the standard. The vote doesn't count. It's an illegal vote if the signatures didn't match, period. It doesn't matter why the signatures don't match. It only matters that the signatures don't match. And they try to change the standard overnight just to escape accountability in Arizona. But those dimwits that brought the Trump January 6th indictment don't know this, because they're actually alleging in the indictment
that's what I wanted to talk
that the signatures did match and that Trump knows they did. When it's exactly the opposite. That tells you how insular this group of people are. Like a smart, corrupt prosecutor.
They think the signature match.
Would have found a few narrow issues to go after Trump. They wouldn't go after issues that are backfire against them, because they're completely wrong about the vice president electoral contest issue, and they're completely wrong about the signatures matching, which, by the way, is sufficient to have reset the election, because that mattered in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia outside the margin of victory.
Wisconsin.
And that doesn't even – in Wisconsin, you have the indefinitely confined issue.
That was
where the Wisconsin's own Supreme Court admitted these people shouldn't have voted.
Gableman found 200,000 ballots that erroneously declared indefinitely confined
status. These are people who just read MSNBC every day, watch MSNBC and read the New York. And so they don't even know. They really believe that Trump never believed it, and there was never any basis to challenge 2020 election.
But they
believe their own lies. Yeah. I mean, that's what when I read that in the indictment, and raising it in the context of Georgia, I was like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
I mean, this is this is just preposterous. But that's what told me, okay, we have an indictment here because these people are so insular, they don't even know when they're making factual arguments they will get crushed on. It's like those idiots who get exposed on social media where there's some basic assumption they have that everybody that's researched it knows it's utterly false. And then they're shocked when the person exposes them.
Gets quote tweeted.
That's the government in this indictment against the president of the United States. That's how insane this case is. So politically, my view is Trump will only go up. I don't think Trump goes down at all because of the January 6th indictment.
I just don't see the difference here. I know it was the main one. Last time we did a show, you and I sparked a lot of people talking. And by the way, I saw DeSantis aligned pollsters respond to what we had said about trending demographics and the shifts with different polls between 2020 and 2024. Now they just look ridiculous because their answer to that, Robert, is that we were citing a bunch of quote trash and quote shitty polls. All right.
Now we have the New York Times.
It was every single poll we were talking about. I don't know what they were making that assumption. Now we have the New York Times. Here it is, which never had Trump above 41% nationally in 2020. Now it's a 9.
It never had him up, or even really, frankly, I think wasn't the average lead 8 to 10 points?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and their final was Biden plus 9. So now the age groups you and I had been talking about are so clear as day. Not only ages, but groups in general are so clear in this. This New York Times poll looks like a big data poll. I'm talking about, up to down. Everybody, the people on locals were like, these are your margins in the last national poll, basically. They're just weighting it a little bit different. 18 to 29, Trump's only down 10 points. 30 to 44, it's about even. He's down 3. That's it. The biggest age group is 45.
And that's your millennials. You're 30 to 49.
Exactly
that's a plus 30 Democratic group when they first started voting.
Damn right.
And that is a mat. And if you hone down further, Roy Texera, the lefty, labor, populist-oriented Democratic pollster and data analyst, he put out an article on his Substack called Liberal Patriot. A bunch of people post there, but he posts there as
I'll
well.
have to check that out.
And he pointed out, he goes, there's a massive problem with the minority working class for Democrats.
Yeah.
And he goes, the gap in the New York Times own polling, they have more than a 30-point movement amongst non-college, non-white voters. If you hone down further, you will find almost all of that movement is Gen Xers and millennials and Zoomers.
He's -3 with Hispanics. -3. Even with Asians, it's only 47, 41. I don't think people understand the significance of what we're saying here. And then you remember, Robert, they were saying that the people, and you say, and I love, Kurt's my buddy and everything, but the things he says are just completely asinine, and he holds to them, even though something like this comes out and it completely blows up his argument. The idea that Trump is going to lose all of these people who voted for him in 2020. Newsflash, Trump has more of his base who voted for him in 2020 than Biden does. And all of the new voters, which Nate Cohen projects to be about 17%, all of the new voters are Trump +6.
Yeah. And that's because
that's a win for him.
The reason why Democrats thought they would continue to surge after Obama is the generational shift.
Exactly.
Republicans were strongest the older the voter got, and
were
were very weak with the younger voting generational cohorts. They were constantly losing Gen Xers, millennials, and Zoomers, and they were losing millennials by massive, massive margins. Gen Xers were a little bit more competitive, but then that New York Times made this point a couple of months ago. Trump did better amongst every single generational cohort.
Yes.
And the only reason Biden was able to hold on, even if you ignore the 5 million extra votes he probably didn't legally get, that it was only because of the generational shift of voting shares. So on paper, Republicans should be constantly, like when people use Romney, I say if in today's electorate, Romney loses by 10.
That was 12 years ago. Do they not understand things change? Right. Oh, Romney gets killed.
And a lot of those people are dead, and the new voters are the kind of people who voted 30 points or more for Obama.
Yeah.
So this constant generational shift in the voting demographic is, along with the increasing number of Mexican American and Latino voters expected to add, was the primary reason Democrats thought they would soon have a lock on the national electorate. And what's happening is they're massively losing the working class segments of minorities, millennials, younger Gen Xers, and Zoomers. And it's all on the economic, but they're only losing them to Trump. They're not losing them to any other Republican.
I was just going to say, Robert, you think they didn't poll DeSantis versus Biden? You're out of your mind. They polled it. They did not release it. It's not out because they know what it's going to show. And this is the thing. Trump is -10 with 18 to 29, and he's at about 40%. However, when you pit that same 18 to 29-year-olds and you ask them about Biden versus DeSantis, Biden will always get a few points higher, and DeSantis will be in the low 30s, high 20s. He gets crushed. This income group right here, because people have to understand how this overlaps, not just about education, but with income. The under 50,000, Trump is actually carrying in this New York Times poll now, 44 to 40. He's carrying the 50 to 100, 44 to 41, and is only losing voters who make over 100,000 a year. That's it. That is the big shift.
By the way, it should be a reminder to all the people that are saying we should only let the big property holders and taxpayers.
Yeah.
Guess what? They vote Democrat, folks. You need to wake up to the economic. The richest parts of America vote Democrat. They're not voting. They're not voting Republican because Democrats align their economic interests so they can steal from the rest of us. Because it turns out the more you limit the franchise, the more you increase the parasitic qualities of the state.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And like I said, I've kicked this stuff around in my head before, Robert, with stuff, should there be, some kind of a bar?
I mean, I would love it if people were much more informed as part of our
that's process. What it comes down to, though.
The problem is you cannot give that power to the state.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you do, it's guaranteed to screw you.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. That's that's it.
It's why
And that's
I have the view that I oppose licensing for lawyers. I oppose licensing for doctors. Now, do I want lawyers to be uneducated? No. Do I want doctors to be uninformed? No. But I think the free market would be a much better mechanism to assess the qualities of lawyers and doctors than the state, because we know the state will abuse that power, as we are witnessing in live time. Doctors
Yeah.
losing their medical license and losing their credentials because they challenged the state on COVID. Lawyers because they challenged the election. So I mean, we cannot give when anybody's coming up with a policy, they need to ask, who am I giving the power to? And if you're giving the power to the state, it's why I oppose Ohio 1. I get why conservatives they're nervous that they're going to lose the abortion vote in the fall in 2020. I guess it's up on 2023 and on the abortion referendum. So they're like, hey, let's go back and change the Ohio Constitution and shift all the power to the state legislature so that now you're going to have to get supermajority, 60% or more, to change the Ohio Constitution.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
right now you have an edge with the state legislature. Doesn't
But you
mean
may
you're
not
always
forever.
going to. What happens when the state legislature is a pro-choice state legislature? Now you've just screwed yourself, and because you can't go to the electorate and override them. So, I mean, who are you giving the power to? If you're giving the more power to the state or politicians, it's almost without fail a mistake.
Let me just tell you, because I went back just for, what's in giggles. I went back and looked at the last final New York Times poll, 18 to 29, 60 to 33. Even in that 45 to 64 cohorts, it was 49 to 45, which Trump now leads 48 to 39. This is a massive shift. And so, I mean, I know we're coming to a close here.
Well, it's the millennials especially, who now are almost all 30 to 50. They're almost all in that age range now. So it's nice. But, 4 years ago, they were in the 26 to 29. They included that group, et cetera. That's when you do a deep dive, like Pew does track by generational cohort. You have a millennial movement that's 20 points or more. And then when you hone down, and you look at working class millennials and you look at women and minorities in that group, you get even bigger Trump movement. And it's the reason that they keep indicting the man. The reason that they're terrified in part because of the power he has, but they're really terrified of him because they can see this data like anyone else. Right now, Trump is the only guy that beats him. Trump is the only guy that has beat them in the post-Obama era. Trump is the only, there's at least some of them that realize Trump beat him in 2020. So they realize that not only does the deep state fear his power, the Democratic Party fears his victory. And they know what the so-called smart people in the room on the Republican side don't understand, which is this massive working class minority millennial shift. But it's one only toward Trump. And for other people that say, well, Hillary was uniquely unpopular. Biden right now is at the same ratings that Hillary was. So there's no difference between the two of them. And yet, just like 2016, only Trump wins. The other generic Republicans don't. Why? Because of 2012. That working class segment, and especially working class millennials and Zoomers, do not trust a generic Republican. They in fact distrust. That's what showed up in 2022 in a lot of key swing states. They're like, schmuck versus schmuck, I'm staying home. And if you want to, it's not only Trump or bust. It's Trump or die for the Constitution and for the Republican Party.
Let me ask you this last question, which came from a super chat to close it out here. But before I do, just as you were rattling off some of those demographics, Trump is 4 times or 3 times higher in support with black voters in this new New York Times poll than he was in the final New York Times poll. He's almost 10 points higher with Hispanics. Joe Biden is 10 points lower. I mean,
voters who know, we've talked about it. You've seen some of the individual interviews too.
Oh yeah.
Voters know what it's like. I mean, why do I say Trump would win if they actually are dumb enough to lock him up before Election Day? Because Trump has made himself relatable to the entire to a whole new constituency.
Yeah,
that did not see a reality TV billionaire celebrity, New York, 75-year-old businessman as anything they could relate to. Now that the man is trying to take a bash to his brain, to where, he makes the jokes that every time I fly over a state, a grand jury forms, that the net effect of it is that a bunch of people who do know of the abuse of power of those who hold it, and especially in the criminal justice process, which are disproportionately going to be Black and Latino America, recognize him, understand him, can relate to him.
Can relate to it, Robert.
In fact, one of the people, a smarter Democrat actually said, look, the indictment's not going to work politically because the indictment, even if the trial is rushed, because the indictment will be the campaign. Yeah. Like there always people say, oh, it'll be tied up in court and so forth. No, that will be the whole campaign. It will be Donald Trump against the system. And Donald Trump's going to win that electorally. And that's what they don't understand. And they are not ready for the rebuke. Imagine they have Donald Trump locked up, and on election day, Donald Trump wins in an electoral college landslide.
Yeah,
that will be a rebuke the system was utterly unprepared for.
What are they going to do, Robert, if that happens? Which gets to
if I was them, I'd be checking out which countries don't have extradition.
Don't have extradition rules. Yeah, better look out. Some of those Latin American, I think Brazil, that'd be a safe place for them to go.
There's some country in Namibia. Namibia is not bad.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Is there any way the Republican? This leads into this question because I think I already know how you're going to answer it up the same way I would. Is there any way the Republic can actually survive this? I can't help but see this as being irreparable damage.
Well, America has needed a revolution about once a century. We had the Civil War, which led to Lincoln at Gettysburg, which redefined the full meaning. In my view, took the Declaration of Independence and made it read in the words that it was written in, and establishing abolition. Thomas Paine had been an abolitionist. Benjamin Franklin had been an abolitionist.
That's right.
Two of the critical founders of America. And in addition to that, and I consider the founders the entire people, not just a few elites. Obviously Ben Franklin and Thomas Paine had a massive intellectual influence, but the only reason why the revolution succeeded is a bunch of ordinary working class people fought in
Yowman
for 6 years.
It was a Yowman revolution.
Yeah, yep. Absolutely. It was one of the first volunteer armies, effectively in the world at the time. So without that, there would have been no American Revolution. So when people say the founders, I include all those people, including my ancestors. I don't say, well, they weren't at the convention, so they don't count. The words on paper would have got nowhere unless a whole bunch of ordinary people made it happen. Made it happen in economic boycotts on British goods, made it happen in smuggling goods and weapons to the people in the field, and made it happen with the boys in the field. That generation believed in equality. That generation believed all men are created equal, and that is the power from which all government stems, is from the people, not from the state. It is the core of America. But we had kind of lost touch with that for part of our history, and the American and the Civil War and Lincoln at Gettysburg answered that question in the Declaration's form. But it still took another century because we got AWOL again through a long period of time, denying institutionally not only Black voters, but most poor white voters throughout all of the Deep South an opportunity to participate in the election and the political process and in juries and in everything else. And we had to fix it again a century later in the revolution partially brought by Martin Luther King. And again, his I Have a Dream speech went right back to where? The Declaration of Independence. So we are a little bit ahead of schedule. Rather than a century, we're at about the 70-year mark. But the reality is our institutions have atrophied, I would say, almost a century, because it started after World War II. It started during the end of, and at the end of World War II, a deep state came in, took power. They had managed to hold power despite occasional ups and downs. They were assassinating presidents and would-be presidents and civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King and others, starting wars around the world, disguising what they were really up to, claiming it was anti-communism or anti-terrorism when it was really aggrandizing their own power. And now we've reached the culmination of that. And we're either going to let them win, and if they do, the republic will collapse, or we use it as an opportunity to expose them to the world and in the process reform the country, return it to its Declaration roots, and restore American liberty once and for all. And I think that's what the American people are going to do come November 2024.
I cannot see at this point them accept. First of all, Americans love the underdog story, and they don't like people taking away. It's the same reason why they reflexively support certain rights, even though they don't love abortion. They still want you to have the right to do certain things in extreme cases. Now, they don't support the Democratic Party's position, but they reflexively lean to rights. And I cannot see them endorsing an administrative state that effectively is saying you're not allowed to pick your leaders anymore. Americans love to give authority the big middle finger when their back is against the wall. So Norm and everyone who's wondering that question, that's I think that's how you preserve it. You give them that middle finger.
That's how what Thomas Jefferson said. He expected that every generation or two, you would have to rebirth the American experiment. Because it's the nature of power that it atrophies. Particularly, the more power you give the state, the more likelihood it will get corrupted and abused. And so, 10 years ago, when I was telling people these things about our FBI, about our Justice Department,
they look
about
at
our
crooked eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially conservatives. That's a lot of commie talk. What do you, give me those lectures. Now I don't have to explain it to them. They come up and ask me, presuming it's true. That the challenges are true. So I think that the probabilities are that ultimately we get, and I also do think in this process, the U.S. Supreme Court will likely step in at some point, because I think they are not as politically tone deaf as the district court is in D.C. And what the district court in D.C. doesn't realize is they're getting exposed. It's kind of like the deep state of the 60s. Assassinates Kennedy, assassinates Bobby Kennedy, assassinates Martin Luther King, sets up Richard Nixon. And then all of a sudden, there's massive blowback. All of a sudden, a huge reform. People come in the House and the Senate. Frank Church has his own intelligence committee. All of a sudden, all of their scandals got exposed in a 2-year time frame. It shocked the deep state to a degree they never fully recovered from. They partially recovered, but the deep state 1981 forward is a shell of the one but in the 1950s and 1960s. Like, now they wouldn't even necessarily think about assassinating an American leader. Because of how easily they got attacked. People like Mark Felt were indicted. He was utterly shocked that he got indicted.
You don't think so? You don't worry about Trump if he wins, Robert? If he defeats all these people and ends up victorious and becomes president again, you don't worry about his safety?
Oh, there's no question that his safety is at risk and Robert Kennedy's safety is at risk. But they're both kind of life insurance for the other, as long as each is around.
Yeah, that's why he better damn sure pick wisely with his vice president. It has to be somebody.
Pick someone like Kerry. Pick someone the system would be more terrified of, or as terrified of as him. That's why I'm for Kerry Lake. I don't mind JD Vance. I like JD too. I don't know if JD would do it, but
good job just
JD is sharp, and they don't trust JD. And JD's one of those guys that believe the 9/11 lies, went to war, and hasn't forgiven the system for it.
That's right.
That's why he had the guts to come out against Ukraine early in the Republican primary when everyone else was terrified to do it, and he won the Ohio primary that way. And now he's going to be U.S. Senator for as long as he wants to be U.S. Senator.
Yeah. He's a fixture until he decides otherwise. Right. Because
I agree. Trump. Some of us told Trump not to pick Pence. He did anyway. But some of that Trump has really seen the consequences of the mistakes he made. And I think some of that will be improved. But also, Kerry Lake is very charismatic. I say she, and you know this.
Certainly smoother.
Contrary to conventional wisdom, Sarah Palin was the greatest gift McCain ever got. Without Palin on the ticket, McCain loses by 12 or more. The only reason why Republicans are able to hold some seats in some places that otherwise would have been tough is because Sarah Palin revitalized the base. The base that did not like John McCain at all loved Sarah Palin. And whatever you'll think about her, very charismatic, very good on the stump. And the base could care less what the media thinks of somebody. And even though her whole campaign was run by traitors, now it's what's her name on MSNBC. People forget that's the kind of people McCain put in power, and running Sarah Palin's vice presidential effort were people like what's her name, that dipshit. What's her name on MSNBC? That fraud.
I can't. I know. Obviously, let me look it up.
I can see her, but I keep forgetting her name.
Hold on.
She was one of the people constantly sabotaging Sarah Palin to the press. But now imagine that she. A Kerry Lake, who's spent her entire
Nicole
life.
Wallace.
Yes, Nicole Wallace.
And
What a fraudulent
he
hack.
answered to Steve Schmidt, which is just
Yes,
incredible.
Steve Schmidt, another fraudulent hack.
Yep.
Another Lincoln whatever crap board association. Now, to Tree Climber's question, if Trump were to nominate Alex Jones for vice president, then Trump would never be assassinated, impeached, or indicted again.
And also another one, Colonel Doug McGregor believes a fair election can't happen and all-out conflict is very possible. Look, I try.
I don't think our system. Well, they're so overconfident. They think that Trump will lose. It's almost 2016 level overconfidence. They think that Trump will lose as soon as they get him convicted. They think that. I mean, that's why I actually didn't mind that Reuters poll circulating, because I was like, okay, this will trick them into thinking they don't need to do anything else. They just need to convict him, and that they'll win on election day, and then they'll be shocked when the election day results come pouring in.
Which we've seen. We've seen this happen twice already. We saw it in 2016.
They were shocked in 2020. Don't forget that.
But in 2020,
that's why they had to work overtime. They had to shut down the county. Shut down the county. We got to find the ballots. We got to get George.
Cut the feed.
Come on, print, baby, print.
Cut the feed. He's got too many votes.
Yeah, exactly.
And by the way, you could see that turn in Team DeSantis, in DeSantis world. You could see them over the course of 2 weeks end up now where DeSantis is just flatly saying Trump lost the election. You could see it happen already. Even though every single one of these people on Twitter, you can go back in their Twitter feeds and pull up where they said Trump was robbed and defrauded. But yeah, so Robert, tell people where to go.
Oh yeah, so I do a political betting report. Each at least once a month, sometimes multiple times in a month, that gives out analysis, and even we include betting on the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the general election, but also specific political events. Whether the Fed will raise rates, whether the what will happen in terms of Ukraine, a whole bunch of things like that at sportspicks.locals.com. That's sportspicks.locals.com.
The short Ron DeSantis pick months and months ago, 6 months ago, whatever it was at this point, that's the pick of the year, brother. Because he was
it's amazing. The shorting DeSantis is up fivefold in profit in just 6 months.
Fivefold.
And the Robert Kennedy bet, because we put it out before even officially fully announced, up fivefold as well in just 4 months.
It's because you got in there before that Suffolk poll with him at 20%.
Yeah, exactly.
And
we put him out there when he was at 1%, and even 2% for the Democratic Party. Now he's at 5, 6, 7% to win the general. He's at the almost 10, over 10% and predict it. He's around 12% at times in the Democratic Party process. So people have been able to cash in massive profits betting on Robert Kennedy and betting against DeSantis, as well as that betting on Biden still being there and betting on Trump dominating better than expected, as well as some other bets in there too. But yeah, 2023 has been very profitable from a political betting.
It's been a good year for you. It's been a big year for you. So I'm telling you. So we'll be back next month, folks. Go to sportspicks.locals.com and don't forget to check out the Public Polling Project. All right. Publicly funded public opinion. That's our new slogan. All right, get it out there. We're going to do a national one and then probably go back to Florida, which would be cool. But looking forward to that. So, all right, Robert, I'll see you next month, my friend. Thanks, the best. Everybody. Later, everyone. Robert Barnes, ladies and gentlemen, Robert Barnes. All right, I'll see you guys on Wednesday on Inside the Numbers. Don't miss it. All right, noon Eastern Standard Time. And, of course, join the locals community. peoplespundit.locals.com. All the best.
Shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway. Restless nights, coffee houses, buzzing neon lights. I ride